Well, it is, yeah. Thank you. It is good to be back. Yeah, oh yeah, all right. Thank you. It's good to see you guys. All right, you're on my time now. You're on my clock now. I got time. All right, we can hang out for a while. Gosh. I should go away for a couple months more often. This is nice. I don't know. But it is good to see you all. And those of you who are online as well, great to have you as well with us. For those who are new over the last couple of months, or maybe don't remember all the way back to May when I was last here, I'm Wolfgang, and I work here. And so glad. In fact, I know, from what I understand now, new folks, if you take that little welcome card, if you're here on our campus, if you take that welcome card to the welcome table back there, they will give you a cool mug, and they will also give you a voucher for free lunch out at one of the food trucks today, which made me wonder, how long do you have to be gone to qualify for one of those? You know what I mean? So I'm gonna give that a test after this is over. We'll see how it goes, but hopefully you'll join me if you are new. But it is wonderful to be back, and to go back a bit to what we were just watching on the video. I mean, we could not have dreamed for better things to be said by that kindergarten teacher as she shared about the impact that Community Serve Day has now made for over a decade, both in Lake Washington and in the North Shore School District. And to think about the impact that has, that goes beyond just a fresh-looking building and a neatly decorated classroom, but the impact it has on teachers, on students, enabling them to do a better job, enabling families to be more prepared. It is something we get to do that shows our world that there is a God who loves them and we love them too, all right? That's totally true. So the reason I bring this up, and I want to just be very direct. Yes, Justin mentioned we are not going to be worshiping on campus on the 22nd. We will be worshiping all over this community on the 22nd, okay? And if you have not signed up for that, I do not know what is wrong with you. All right, I'll just be very direct, because there's stuff for everybody to do, age, ability, whatever. There's indoor stuff, outdoor stuff. We could use your help. So 3,000 people total, 9 different churches, all kinds of organizations, 30 different schools. Be part of it and check that out. But anyway, back to what, let me say as I'm jumping in, I am so deeply thankful for the gift that this sabbatical was to me and to my family. And so to the leadership here at North Shore, to all of you for very generously allowing for such a benefit like this, it was fabulous, fabulous time. And I am rested, excited to be back. And I did everything from epoxy my garage floor to travel in Spain with my 17-year-old son. And everything in between. And it was absolutely fantastic. So, in fact, the experience that my son Stone and I had over in Spain is one of the things I want to tell you about. It was the highlight of our trip. It actually ties in to what it is that we're talking about here today. Because for a week, my son Stone and I packed up our backpacks and hiked a 1,000-year-old pilgrimage route across the north of Spain called the Camino de Santiago. I know some people here have done it. It's an amazing experience. This is an image of my son Stone, and you have these little markers all along the trail, and it weaves through little villages and little towns, through deep woods, up on mountaintops all over the place. As someone who loves history and things like that, we came across places like this specific church here. It was built in the 1100s. That's just so cool to me, right? And it's a long story. Maybe I'll tell you sometime if you want, but we went to visit it. It was closed, and as we were leaving, this 94-year-old guy, who's the caretaker of the church, emerges from his house and says, "Venga, venga, venga." He calls us back. He says, "Would you like to see the church?" He opens this church for us and takes us on this private tour of frescoes that were painted before Columbus sailed to the New World. I mean, just amazing stuff, which for a history nerd like me is like heaven, all right? It was an incredible experience, and to get to share it with my son. And then, of course, that big climactic moment, 80 miles, 5 days later from when we started, Stone and I standing in front of the cathedral, which tradition says has the bones of St. James, James the Apostle, brother of John, one of the closest circle of Jesus. And to see the inside and to visit the experience was just unbelievable. It's an experience I'll never forget. But one of the things that was so special about it wasn't only doing it with my son, of course, that was the highlight of it all, but along the way, we met so many interesting people. Now, this was back at the beginning of the July. This was just after Spain had reopened to tourists, vaccinated tourists from the US. And so there weren't as many hikers along the way as there normally would be, but we still met people from everywhere, from Barcelona to Biloxi, Mississippi, from Italy to India. And they were young, they were old, different backgrounds, different races. It was incredible. Because every year, people travel from all around the world to take this hike. In fact, in one of the previous peak years, just a few years ago, more than 270,000 people walked this route. The whole length is 500 miles. But to receive this certificate that they give at this special office at the cathedral, you have to do at least the last 70 or 80. 270,000 people in a single year did this. Now, what in the world would attract 270,000 people from around the world to leave their lives for at least a week, many for much longer than that, to tie on their hiking boots, to trek up and down the mountains of Spain to visit the Cathedral of St. James? And this is not the Burt Gilman Trail. No disrespect to you Burt Gilman friends. This is like, there's hills and it's steep and there's all kinds of stuff going on this trail. Some do it for adventure, they'll say. Some do it because they want to get themselves in physical shape. But most of the people who do this walk, they report when they check in at the cathedral, they say they were doing it for some spiritual reason. It was a pilgrimage for them. And as a result, there are dozens of books, hundreds of blogs that are written by people who had this experience, who described their quest for some kind of spiritual awakening, some kind of insight. Because there's some hunger in them that they're hoping this pilgrimage will help them find what it is that they're looking for. See, here's a fundamental belief in my life. I believe everybody is searching for something bigger than themselves, some purpose, some reason for life bigger than just themselves. And they may not articulate it as spiritual, but that same impulse that drives people to take the Camino drives them to do all other kinds of things as well, to try to find meaning, to try to eke some purpose or meaning out of this. It could be work, it could be relationships, it could be hobbies. It takes many forms, but we're looking for some bigger purpose or meaning in our lives. Even if we try to drown it out or pretend it's not there, all of us have this, some deep sense. The Old Testament book of Ecclesiastes puts it this way. Speaking of God, it says, God has set eternity in the human heart. In other words, there's something deep inside all of us, isn't there, that just knows there's more. I always think of it like the Northwest salmon, that deep inside just has this instinct that one day it will go back to wherever it was born. It just happens. Nature marvels at why that is. But there's this deep instinct in them. Friends, I believe we have that same sort of instinct in every human heart. That there's more, something beyond this life. That there's more than just growing up, going to school, getting a job, retiring, and then dying. But there's more to life than that. There's a bigger story, a bigger purpose. Most people I know wonder about such things, and they'll hike 500 miles. If it'll help them find it. So on one hand, you have all these folks with this hunger. On the other hand, you have all these people who are followers of Jesus who believe we've discovered this big story. We've discovered there is a God who sees us, who knows us, who even loves us. And he was willing to come to this earth to put on human skin and bones, just like you and me, to deal with stresses and relationships and temptations and struggles in life. And through his life and his death and his resurrection, Jesus makes it possible for us to live an entirely different kind of life, both in this world and in the one to come. That's what we believe. And for those of us who are followers of Jesus, somewhere along the way, someone told us that story. They told us that good news. They told us that truth. Whether it was your parents, whether it was a friend, whether it was a pastor, whatever it was, whenever it was, they did what the Apostle James did. When tradition tells us he left Jerusalem where he'd been serving with Jesus, and he went all the way to Spain to tell other people about this good news. Somewhere along the way, someone did that for you. And so from those earliest apostles all the way up to this very moment, people have lived out this challenge, this verse from Paul in Romans chapter 10, where Paul writes, how can people believe in Jesus if they've never heard about him? And how can they hear about him unless someone tells them? They can't. Someone has to tell them somewhere along the way. And this telling isn't just to be done by apostles and by pastor types. It's to be done by all of us who have discovered this good news of Jesus. We get to be part of sharing what it is we've found. But here's the disconnect, right? On one hand, we have this whole world of people searching. And on the other hand, all these people who say they've found it, but for whatever reason, feel too intimidated, too reluctant, too hesitant to ever actually say anything about what they found to anybody else. So that's what we're talking about in this series, this Real Talk series. What does it look like to have authentic spiritual conversations, not staged, rote formulas, but authentic conversations with people about spiritual matters? Can that be natural? Can we get better at that? I believe we can, and that's what we want to do as a church. We want that to be normal for us, where we just talk about what it is we're experiencing. So I want to talk through some of the obstacles that get in the way of that and then get real specific about some ways that we can maybe grow in this area. And a lot of what we've been sharing, Scotty mentioned this last week, a lot of what we've been sharing comes from this little book. It's called Reluctant Witness. It does all sorts of research on people's attitudes, both believers and non-believers, about spiritual conversations. So much insight. Some of that we want to share as we walk through this series. You can check that out. So let me get real practical, okay? What would it look like to bridge that gap between those of us who know and those who are searching? Because people aren't just searching in Spain, friends. They're searching in Kirkland and in Bothell and in Kenmore and in Linwood and in Bellevue. They are even searching in Monroe, those people up there. They're searching everywhere, looking for something deeper. So I want to talk about why are we hesitant and how can we overcome some of those hesitations? Because we don't want to come off as religious wackos, and yet we want to share what it is that we've found. So here you go, 5 myths about spiritual conversations. These come straight from this guy's book. I'm grateful for them. 5 myths about spiritual conversations. Number 1, spiritual conversations take place in special places during special moments by special people. There are certain circumstances, all the stars must align for this to happen, right? Now, that's not true of regular conversations. Regular conversations just happen all the time. You stand in a line, you're at a restaurant, you're talking to somebody at work or your neighbor. You could talk about sports or weather or restaurant, whatever it is. That comes at any time. But for some reason, we feel like these kinds of conversations, they require perfect, idyllic situations and circumstances. And it's only the super spiritual that ever have these kinds of conversations. There have to be rays of sunlight bursting through the clouds and a little dove that flies down and lands on your head or something like that, right? But it's just not true. These kinds of conversations can happen anywhere with anyone. And it's not just pastor types. In fact, one of the pieces of research they found in some of the surveys they did for this little book showed most people would rather have a spiritual conversation with a friend or someone they know than somebody like me, like a pastor. They'd rather hear it from someone they know instead of somebody they perceive to be hired to talk about this stuff. You know what I mean? Because it just feels different. You know that there's a relationship there. That's part of why we do things like Community Serve Day that we mentioned a minute ago. Yes, it is a great way for us to bless our schools and our community. But I think this might be the easiest invitation of the entire year when it comes to things that are happening here at North Shore. Because even if people have no spiritual inclination or openness at all, they can still be part of helping out in their community. And in fact, for those of you online, this is something you can do at your school as well. You can reach out to your local school, say, can I come over and help somehow? It doesn't just have to be here in the Western Washington. But this is the kind of thing that nobody objects to, right? And I've been doing this now for more than 10 years. I can't tell you, almost every one of these years, I've had a conversation with someone I was serving with, either that I knew or had come with someone else who was like, your church does this kind of stuff all the time? Tell me more about that. It's so cool that your church does this kind of stuff. Those are spiritual conversations, friends. They're planting seeds and opening doors to be able to talk about the fact that God calls us to live others-focused lives, not just be absorbed with ourselves. It actually shows them we do more than talk about that in a meeting once a week. We actually do it. And that's what this is all about. And so I hope that not only are you planning to come on the 22nd, but that you're planning to sign up a friend or invite them to come along, because you never know how that might give them a new perception of what it means to be a follower of Jesus, or what church looks like, because so many people carry baggage around that stuff. Okay, keep going here. Second myth a lot of people have. Spiritual conversations are serious and sober events. You know what I mean? I remember this guy that I went to college with. I'll call him Jay, because his name was Jay. And Jay was this Southern guy, like, not to be stereotypical, but kind of hillbilly type, super high-pitched voice, really thick Southern accent. He sounded like somebody off Moonshiners on Discovery Channel. Anybody else watch Moonshiners? I love that show. Anyway, maybe I'm the only one, but Jay sounded like he could come off that show. And Jay was hilarious, super funny, infectious laugh, except when he talked about spiritual things. Because somehow, the minute he started to pray or to talk about spiritual stuff, like preach or whatever, he would be possessed with this deep voice. Suddenly, he would sound like James Earl Jones, you know, the guy that voiced Darth Vader. You know who I'm talking about? Suddenly, this little hillbilly guy would sound like James Earl Jones. Serious, somber. These are heavy matters we're discussing, right? Friends, Christians are allowed to laugh. If there's anyone in the world who ought to be laughing, it's Christians, right? Because how laughable is it that the God of the universe knows everything about us and loves us anyway? We don't have to pretend. He sees us. We know the truth about ourselves, and we're loved anyway. And friends, that's a source of joy. We don't need to take ourselves so seriously. So whether we're joking about goofy, cheesy Christian t-shirts or stupid things that Christian people do on TV or that we do from time to time, the conversations don't all have to be serious. So relax a little. Myth 3, and this is probably the one that I hear the most of all. Maybe you felt this. In spiritual conversations, I need to be able to give the right answers. So many of us are so hesitant to talk about spiritual things because we're afraid we're going to get hit with some question we don't know how to answer. For one, we don't like to look like we don't know what we're talking about. And two, we're a little afraid if we say the wrong thing, maybe we'll like screw them up for eternity or something like that. You know what I mean? But here's what I've found in my relationships and conversations. It is okay to say, you know what, that is a great question. I'm not sure how to answer it. Or to say, you know what, actually, to be truthful, that's a question I sometimes wrestle with. And here's what I've learned along the way. See, you don't have to know it all. You're not God. Sometimes I find people, they're actually more open when we're honest about what we don't know, when we respond to questions, instead of some pre-recorded response or something like that. None of us knows everything. We are all learning and growing. In fact, look at the challenge that the Apostle Peter gave to the early followers of Jesus in 1 Peter 3. He says, always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect. We'll come back to that last line in a minute. But notice what he says, always be prepared to give an answer to every question? No. Prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. It doesn't say you have to know all the answers. It just says, be ready to explain how you're finding hope in Jesus, how he's getting you through this pandemic when so much is uncertain in our world, how you have hope in the future when so many people are uncertain or worried. See, when you tell your story, when you talk about the hope and the peace that you're finding in your faith in Jesus, you don't have to have all the right answers because you're just telling about your story. And that's part of why I love Alpha so much. Many of you know this is a passion of mine. We love this as a church. For people who aren't familiar with Alpha, Alpha is a place designed for folks who wouldn't consider themselves Christians, but are open or curious about spiritual questions. And so the whole thing is laid out about sharing a meal together, watching a short film on a topic of faith, and then having a conversation about that topic. And I'll tell you, I have met some of the most interesting people I know in this city through Alpha. It's a place where questions are welcome. It's right there in the logo, right? There's a reason it's a giant question mark. It's not an exclamation point, Alpha. It's not a period even. It's a question mark. Because it's a place where those questions are welcome, where they're encouraged, where they're respected. Big questions like, is there more to life than this? Who is Jesus? How do I have faith? And the plan is for us to get back together again to have Alpha in person starting this coming September on Sunday evenings. And if you know someone who wouldn't consider themselves a believer but is open to these kinds of conversations, it's the perfect place to invite them. And you can register for that. Sign up at northshore.church/alpha. See, these conversations don't have to happen just in special places with special people. They don't have to be somber or serious, and you don't have to have all the answers, because who does? But there are more myths. Last couple I want to mention here. Myth 4. Most spiritual conversations involve conflict, which ruins everything. See, most of us will be honest, we don't like conflict. Conflict is something we try to avoid. It's not a strength for most of us. And some people have this idea that the key to having spiritual conversations is to be able to debate people into faith. If they can just overcome every perceivable logical objection, that person will fall on their knees in repentance right there, right? Never works that way. But for some reason, that's what we think. Now, it is true, when talking about faith, there will be disagreements. People see the world in many different ways, of course. But we don't have to go looking for arguments or picking fights. We can just talk about what we're learning in ways that are not confrontational or combative. During a sabbatical, I had some time with our extended family who lives in Pennsylvania. We all met up in the Smoky Mountains of East Tennessee. And that's where both my wife and I went to school. Most of our dating years were there. We love the Smoky Mountains. And when we were there this summer, I was reminded of two things. One, 97-degree heat with 100% humidity is no fun, all right? It's no fun. Don't do it, all right? Some of you tasted that. It was like a sauna there. Unbelievable. But there was a second thing that I was reminded of. It was slightly more significant. Not far from the college that I attended, there was a church that I had forgotten about that had one of those changeable signs out front of the building. You know what I'm talking about, where they put like a little message or something like out there. And this church had developed a reputation for putting some of the most confrontational, combative signs out that you could imagine. In fact, I sort of had labeled it when I was a student there, and I'd forgotten about this. I'd labeled it in my mind. I thought of it as the hate church. Because these signs were angry. In fact, some of them were so offensive, I wouldn't even tell you what they were, frankly. And I'd forgotten all about it until one day I was driving back to kind of see the old campus where I'd gone to school with some of my family. And sure enough, the sign was out. Here's what it said: "You think it's hot now, it's even worse in hell," it said. Now, is that true? Probably. Probably. But let me ask you, seriously, do you think anyone has ever driven by a sign like that, pulled off to the side of the road, jumped out of their car, fallen to their knees, and accepted Jesus? Ever? I was a student there in the 90s. It's 25 years ago. I'm pretty sure their streak of signs has probably gone unbroken. How many people you think over those 25 years have found themselves transformed by Jesus' grace or falling in love with the God who loves them because of a sign like that? You think that's working? True or not? Friends, I'd be shocked That's why this passage that we talked about earlier from Peter is so important. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give a reason for the hope that you have, but don't be a jerk about it, he says. As a paraphrase. Do this with gentleness and respect. Jerkiness is not a spiritual gift, all right? So why not just be humble? Why not just be honest? Why not just be gentle? Why have to tear someone else's belief down to build your own up? Why not just lift up how beautiful Jesus is and let him shine? We'll talk more about that next week. It goes back to one of the things that Scott talked about last week, something we could all grow in, the simple habit of listening. Just listening. I have a close friend who is currently working in a closed country where he has to be so wise about how he talks about his relationship with Jesus. Because seriously, he could be deported, he could be arrested, worse could happen potentially if he's suspected of somehow trying to convert people to Christianity. But what he's learned in his time there is by just being curious, by being willing to listen and to hear what other people think, what happens is he finds that others are then curious too. They want to know what he thinks. And he's had incredible conversations about Jesus in some of the most unlikely circumstances you could ever imagine. And friends, that's not just true in closed countries around the world. The same is true here in our culture, in our world. There's no need to go looking for a fight. This isn't about your rights. It's about humbling ourselves enough to be listeners who can walk with folks as they're exploring what it is that we believe they need in their life. There's such great power in humbly listening to others. And when there is conflict, you work your way through it with gentleness and respect. We could all use some growth in this, especially in our culture and our world. Okay, one last myth. Because all that clapping at the beginning ate up all my time. Let me go here. No, I appreciate it very much. It means a lot. Myth 5, you ready? Spiritual conversations are burdensome duties that wind up being regrettable. Not only do we not want to do it, but we're always sad we did when we try, right? This is no fun at all, right? Lots of people see having spiritual conversations like it's this duty, it's this burden, it's this order, and they don't want to do it. And they usually don't. It's kind of like flossing, right? We all agree it's a good idea. But how many of us actually do it consistently? Let's be honest, all right? Maybe some of you do. We commend you for your dental hygiene, all right? We're all impressed, okay? But it doesn't have to be that way. This can be a natural part of our conversations. And the amazing thing is, when we actually have these conversations, they are rarely as awkward as we thought they would be in the first place. Instead, they can be this source of joy. It's actually sort of fun. I experienced that this last week. One of the things I've tried to do in my adult life is to get my hair cut by people who don't go to church, who don't have a spiritual story or don't have a spiritual relationship with Jesus. And if I can manage it, that's who I'll start to go to. Just because it is an easy place to just sit, I'm paying them for the time, right? And they always want to know, what do you do? And what do you tell me about what you did this week or whatever, that kind of stuff. And so I talk about what I do as a pastor, what our church does, brag on North Shore, talk about all the cool things you guys are doing. Well, for the last 8 years, I've been going to a woman named Ashley. See, my problem is I'm not as good looking as Scott. And so I have to have a professional help me get somewhere near visually acceptable, all right? And Ashley's a pro. And I love her because she's one of those people who says whatever is on her mind. I love those people in life. I've always said, I'd rather get punched in the face than stabbed in the back any day of my life. I like people who call it like they see it. Ashley calls it like she sees it. Anyway, I love that. She's as raw and as real as they come. So for years, I've been talking about what I do and things the church is doing. And I'd invite her to things like Christmas or to Easter or to Community Serve Day like I was talking about earlier. And she's always very polite about it. Conversation would keep moving, no problem, but she would never take me up on the invitation. And over the years, she and her husband, they had 2 kids, a little boy, then a little girl. And as time's gone on, I've seen them get more and more open over time. Well, just before Christmas last year, height of the pandemic, another friend of hers invited her to church, and she went. Next thing I know, she's talking about how for Christmas she was asking for a new Bible. She's then telling me about how much she loves the singing, not the sinning, that's another conversation. The singing, let me be clear. Used to be, she said she wouldn't go till 15 minutes late because she didn't like the songs. Now she gets there early, she says. Because when I'm sitting there listening to that music, it makes me cry. My kids love it. My husband won't admit it, but even he likes it, she says. She's still growing, of course. She's early in her faith. But I couldn't believe it when last Wednesday I went in to get my hair cut, and the first thing out of her mouth was an invitation to a worship concert. And I'm thinking to myself, who are you and what have you done with my friend? That's what crossed my mind, right? Because Ashley, of years ago, would never dream of a thing like that. And it has been so amazing to watch this gradual process, this journey that she's been on. And it didn't happen overnight. I mean, she and I have been friends now for 8 years, and I'm not saying it's me by any stretch. It was ultimately, of course, her friend who finally convinced her to come. I couldn't do it. But I'd like to think that all those years of talking, offering to pray for her when she was going through something hard with her family, talking about the difference that I was learning from Jesus when it came to my marriage or to my kids' lives or to my just life in general, that all of those little things played a part in this new beautiful chapter that God's writing in her life. And I'll tell you, I genuinely love Ashley. I mean, she is fantastic. And I'm so excited about what's happening in her life. And in that moment, when she asked me about going to that concert, I was reminded, this isn't some duty I have to fulfill. This is not flossing, friends. This is the opportunity to be part of somebody's forever story. This is a chance to have your life touch another life in a way that will alter eternity. That's got to be one of the greatest honors, one of the greatest joys, one of the greatest gifts you could ever experience. It doesn't have to be painful. It doesn't have to be confrontational. It's just as natural as you talking about a new restaurant you found, or a trip you went on, or a movie you watched. Because people are far more open than you think, friends. So let me ask you, who's your Ashley? And what's holding you back from sharing with them what it is you found? And just bow your head with me. Let's pray about this. Let's ask for God's help. Oh, Lord. God, I thank you. I thank you that you built a bridge, that you reached across a chasm we couldn't cross ourselves. That because of your love for us, you were willing to come, live like us, at times struggle like us, even suffer like us. You get it. And you opened a door so we could have a whole new kind of life. Lord, I thank you right now. I thank you for all the people in my story who told me about that. Whether I wanted to hear it or not, whether it frustrated me or not, I thank you for their grace and their patience and their love to tell me about this good news, to model for me this good news and the difference it's made in my heart as a result. And God, I pray that you will use each of us, myself included, use each of us in that same way in the people's lives we care about. The people all around us who are searching, whether they muster the strength to get to Spain or whether they just quietly go through their every day wondering if there's more. God, I thank you, there is more. You see us, you know us, you love us, you want us. And we can be part of helping others feel the joy that comes with knowing the God of the universe gives a rip and wants to give us a whole new life. So God, I thank you for the lives that are going to be touched by the folks in this room. And I thank you for the people who are here right now or watching online. And the reason they're here or watching is because they're searching. Because there's something in them that says there's more. I'm not sure what it is, but I know there's more. God, you are that answer. You satisfy that hunger. As Jesus said, those who hunger and thirst will thirst no more. And so I thank you for your grace and your love. I thank you for the hope that we can have because of you. And for those searching that want to ask those questions, if you're online, reach out to that person in the chat. They would love to pray with you, to talk with you. If you're here on campus, there are people at the Welcome Center. We'd love to talk and pray with you about this. So God, I thank you. I thank you for being our hope. And I pray this in the name of our living hope, Jesus Christ.